Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for coming, and nice seeing some familiar faces here, as well as meeting some new people. So I grew up in the Boston area. I grew up in Belmont. I now live in Brookline. I work all over the country, really all over the world, but almost all my work is, I'd say, east of the Rockies. And I moved back to the Boston area about 4 years ago for a variety of reasons, but it's nice to be back home. But one thing that's interesting is that, you know, I worked in Miami for a decade. I worked out of DC for a decade. When I was in DC, I oversaw the Mayor's Institute that your mayor talked about, among other things. But one thing that's been really nice about my experience in Boston is that for some reason, maybe it's because I'm from here, and I didn't have that advantage in other places, but I'm actually doing work not too far from where I live. And getting to know the place where I live better. And you know, you get to know a place a certain way when you live in it, and you get to know it a certain way when you plan it. And when you're not from a place and you go there as a planner, it's very easy to jump to conclusions and be very, you know. I think when I don't know a place or its people and I walk into a place to plan it, I have much more confidence than I have when I'm in the Boston area. Because I guess maybe I know I'm leaving, or you know, it's like, you know, you go somewhere and you appear on the front of the newspaper and you're like, wow, that's great. And like, if I get one little article in the Globe, I'm super excited. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that, except to say, it's nice to be lecturing for me at a place that's near my home, a place I don't know very well, but that I've been through on different occasions. But I did what I always do when I'm about to speak in a place, which is I visit in the Google machine and I look around. And it's always interesting to get the impression that you get in Google and then to visit. And Lynn looks pretty good in Google. But places usually look better in real life than in Google. And the feeling you get when you come here very much is a community that feels on the verge of something. Right? Something good. The sense, you know, the urban. I did a plan for Lowell about 10 years ago, for downtown Lowell, that had some nice impacts. And what I said to them when I got there was, you know, Lowell it's gritty, not pretty. But it's even a little handsome, but not pretty. And I think Lynn, you know, it's not pretty yet, but it has that urbanism and that quality of urban vitality that everyone wants now. And I think that you're about to experience a lot more interest than you've seen over the years. And in my talk tonight, I'm going to be talking about general principles, but I'm going to be illustrating them with images from Lynn and examples from Lynn. And it's my job to be critical. And so I want to start out by saying, I actually think things look pretty good here, and that you're in good shape, and that your urban fabric is strong. It's like the state of the nation is strong. The state of your urban fabric is strong. But it's my job tonight to be a little bit critical. So I wanted to start with the positive before I get into some of the details that maybe could merit your attention. When I go to a place, I always try to help as much as I can. Most of the time I go to a place, as I suggested, I go to a place, I give advice, and then I leave. And my firm's very small. I'm not looking to employ a bunch of staff or for the next job, so I'm always very painfully honest. And whenever I go to a place, I assume I'm never going to go back, and I want to leave behind as much advice as I can when I visit to have a positive influence. So that's what I tried to do with this talk tonight. All that said, I'll try to keep it not too long and get you out of here maybe in an hour or a little less. Ideally, this is an 8-hour lecture, and I'll talk about an opportunity to participate in an 8-hour lecture at the end of my talk. But I always, you know, I try to find the things that are most relevant to the community, and I hope I found the issues that are most relevant here. I spent a lot of time, maybe someone mentioned they'd seen my TED Talks. I spent a lot of time as a booster for walkability, and I spent a lot of time trying to convince people why walkability is so important. Really, for me, walkability is a stand-in for all the things that just make for good cities and good towns and good urban places. we called walkability lots of different things through the years. We called it new urbanism, we called it traditional urban planning, we called it just good planning, we called it different things. But what I found starting about 5 or 6 years ago was that if you frame it if you use a framework of walkability to describe it and explain it, people actually understand it a lot better and they're much more likely to get behind it. And so what I'm really going to be talking to you about tonight is just good urban planning. It so happens good urban planning is urban planning that is walkable. And what I'm not going to do tonight, and I'll show you how to get to the TED Talk, what I'm not going to do tonight is give you the talk on why walkability is important. Because honestly, I think in New England, in a community like this, I don't have much convincing to do. You know, they're very powerful arguments, powerful health arguments, powerful economic arguments, powerful sustainability arguments, why we have to make our cities and towns more walkable. But I saved those for the audiences that I think I need to convince. But since we have limited time, I wanted to move on and get into the details of how to make a place more walkable. So we're gonna begin with the general theory of walkability, which asks the question, and it's the framework, it's the organizational structure of my book, Walkable City, which I hope you will read, and I'll be signing them after at that table. And the general theory of walkability asks the question, how do you get people to walk? In America, in which so many people own cars, and in which driving is so easy and cheap, you know, you don't pay the full cost of driving by a long shot, right? And the car is sitting there, you know, it's subsidized, driving is subsidized in so many ways. You know, non-drivers as well as drivers are paying for you to drive if you're driving. And the car is sitting there, and 4/5 of the cost of having a car is just having the car, and only 1/5 is driving the car. In other words, for a typical American sedan, the fixed costs of owning the vehicle and the insurance are the vast majority of your costs. And so actually, there's an incentive to drive it as much as possible. And every mile costs less than the mile before. So there's all this incentive to drive. In those circumstances, how are you going to get people to make the choice to walk instead in an environment in which walking is possible? And the answer is that the walk has to be as good as the drive, period. So what does that mean? Well, we think that it needs to do 4 things at once. The walk needs to be useful. It needs to be safe. We've got a hyperkinetic clicker here, I'll do my best. It needs to be safe, comfortable, and it needs to be interesting. So that's the structure of this talk tonight. I'm going to take you through the useful walk, the safe walk, the comfortable walk, and the interesting walk, and talk a little bit about what that might mean for Lynn. So the reason to walk begins with a story that I learned from my bosses, my old mentors and colleagues, Andres Dwani and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg. I spent 10 years with them in Miami. And Andres used to give this lecture called The Story of Planning, in which he talked about the 19th century when people were choking on the soot from the dark satanic mills, and the planners who weren't yet called planners said, hey, why don't we separate the housing from the factories, which they did. And of course, when they did that, lifespans increased immediately and dramatically. And the planners were hailed as heroes, and we like to say they've been trying to experience that forever since, that great victory. So the separation of the landscape into large areas of single use became the foundation of planning, and particularly American planning, what's called Euclidian zoning, where you have retail separated from office, separated from medical office, separated from low-density housing, separated from high-density housing. And this is how we planned for 50 years. And I should say that we now know this was wrong, to separate uses from each other. When you go to planning school, you're not taught this anymore. But most of the time when I land on a site, not a downtown, but a site that's ready to be developed, there's a map on the site already and it looks like this. And if you're going to develop something in which the uses are mixed, actually you have to undo the existing zoning. So I was an art history major, and I went to Williams College, which is a great art history department, and people always say art history is not the most profitable major, but I always put it to use. I say you don't want a Rothko, you want a Seurat, right? Rothko did the blobs, and Seurat was the pointillist. And the most walkable places in America are the places where the uses are mixed the most finely, the most confetti-like. Manhattan is technically the most walkable place in America. Maybe not the most comfortable or pretty place to walk, but in terms of just statistically, there's more walking happening there. Principally a function of the fact that there are more subway stops in Manhattan than in the entire rest of the United States combined, all the other cities. But also because of the way that the uses are mixed so finely in this way. And this map is actually misleading because this dark red color is uses that are mixed vertically, right? So that leads to kind of the fundamental new urbanist story, which I tell everywhere I go because it's the story that turned me on to this whole profession and the importance of the work that needs to be done, which I heard again from Andres back in the 80s. Andres spoke at the Museum of Fine Arts, I think in 88 in Boston. And I heard the lecture, and he told he gave this talk called Towns versus Sprawl. And he made a point which is more or less true. There are only two tested ways to build community in the world. There's 100 ways to make a town, but there's only two ways that we've tested by the hundreds or the thousands. One is the traditional neighborhood, and the other is suburban sprawl. Does anyone recognize this neighborhood? Newburyport. We've been showing this for 30 years all over the world. Just for some reason, this has been our best slide to show. The traditional neighborhood is defined in planning terms as being diverse, compact, and walkable. Diverse in planning terms means different uses, as I've suggested. So bigger houses and smaller houses and places to work and places to shop, right? There's the main street, places to worship, places to recreate. Most of your daily needs are within walking distance. You're actually looking at several neighborhoods of Newburyport, and what you find when you look at different cities around the world and throughout history is that a neighborhood is almost always a 5-minute walk from edge to center. If you think about a city like Manhattan, or a borough like Manhattan, right? There's Soho, and the West Village, and the East Village, all these different neighborhoods. Well, you look around the world in Paris or London, and you still find neighborhoods that are about a half mile across, which equates to that 5-minute walk from edge to center. So they are compact. And then there's lots of streets. So no one street needs to be that big, and that's what makes it walkable. So let's look at sprawl. In contrast, clearly not compact, thus the name. Clearly not diverse, right? Whole square miles, as I showed you, will hold just one use, sometimes just one house, over and over again. And then, so few of the streets actually go anywhere, right? Most of them are loops or cul-de-sacs, and as a result, those few streets that do connect have the burden of all the traffic of the entire city. And so these streets that tend to be about a half mile away from each other are carrying so much traffic that they're designed around that one purpose, right? How many cars can they move, how quickly? Like sewer pipes. In fact, we call them automotive sewers, right? And you can see that they're noxious like sewers. The houses have walls and they turn their backs to them. There's not a single address on this entire street because it's just a highway, it's not a street. It's a road, not a street. So it's not walkable. And that's the other model, and it's fun, sprawl has been the dominant development pattern for about 50 years, and it's very fun to poke fun at it, and we break it down to its constituent parts, the places where you only live, where you only work, where you only shop, and even schools and other public institutions tend to be consolidated and supersized, but there's still a trend towards making schools bigger and consolidating them. The larger your school is, though, the further it is from you. Think about that, right? Because the more land area it's covering. And this is a South Florida school. The ratio of the parking lot to the school tells you what you need to know, which is no child has ever walked to it or will ever walk to it. In fact, the juniors and the seniors are driving the freshmen and the sophomores with the death rates to prove it. And then even this, also in South Florida, this of course happens throughout the Sun Belt and lots of other places, but this is Weston, which is west of Fort Lauderdale. They call it, the billboards say the feeling of a small town. But, and they're very proud of their 8 soccer fields and their 8 baseball diamonds and 8 tennis courts. But a child that lives in this house actually has a 1.5 mile drive. And I can't map it on this image, but it's basically, up and around. And then down this street, which is a traffic sewer that the mother would never let the kid, or the father would never let the kid on by themselves. So again, you have this presumption. If you design a place around the presumption that everyone's driving, then of course it makes the alternative impossible. And then the part of sprawl that we forgot to count, which is if you separate the landscape into large areas of single use and reconnect it only with automotive infrastructure, then our highway system becomes a commuting way and has to be widened and widened and widened. So I always tell people it's a two-part deal. You know, if you want this, some people still do, you know, the house that's isolated, you also get that. You can't have one without the other. Often to absurd extremes. Does anyone know this? This is near here. This is like it's on the north side of Boston. But this was done, I think, to save like an old Burger King or something, or Wendy's. But the amount that we invest in our horizontal infrastructure so that you never have to wait more than one cycle at a light, right? Because the environment is so utterly banal that if you have to wait more than one cycle, you just want to kill yourself, so that's not allowed, right? So we're robbing our civic buildings of investment because this is where all of our national treasure is going. And of course, the experience of being a driver can be very annoying. This is not Photoshop, by the way. Walter Kulash took this picture. So, you know, being a driver can stink, and being a pedestrian can be worse. And then the doctors have been telling us. Now, you've probably seen this image before, because I've been showing it for 20 years. I got it from an epidemiologist, from a health doctor, you know, a health expert, who said, you know, it took me a while to realize that the principal reason why we've the first generation of Americans who are expected to live shorter lives than their parents is because we've engineered out of existence the useful walk in our communities. You know, walking is no longer happening as a matter of course for people to get where they're going, even to the corner store, or to the soccer field, or to school. And the idea that you can park to take the escalator to the gym to get on the treadmill to walk just shows how we're kind of mixed up as a society. So these are the two models, and this is the only part of my talk. This is the only part of my talk that's about making new places, because that's not what we're here to talk about. It's very important when you're a planner to discuss making new places, because we do that, right? But the rest of my talk is all about the places we have, such as Lynn. But these are the two models, and if you or anyone you know is building new places, this is the most important image to remember. Because the key is it's the same stuff, right? Places to work, places to go to school, places to live, places to shop. But how big is it? How far separated is it? And actually, do you have a network? Do you have a nice system of small streets, what we call a porous network of blocks? Or do you have what's called a dendritic system, a branching system where you take the highway to the arterial, to the collector, to the local, to get where you're going? Because this system is half the problem of sprawl. Because, you know, it's a great irony. It was created for automobiles, right? This was a system designed all around cars. Yet, you know, if there's an accident here, there's 50 other ways to get where you're going to avoid the accident. If there's one engine fire on this collector road, your whole system shuts down for the afternoon. So it's an extremely challenged system. So sear these two images into your memory if you work on new places. Meanwhile, we'll talk about older places like downtown Lynn. And when you're looking at an older place, you ask the same question. We want it to break, we're on the first category, the useful walk. We want it to be useful. So you look at all the different uses that are in your downtown. I gave it away. And you ask the question, you know, what use is missing or underrepresented? And in most downtowns, yours not as bad as many, but in most American downtowns and Lynn as well, there is an underrepresentation of housing. And it's really when you get a much better balance of housing and the other stuff, the commerce, that downtowns really begin to thrive. And when the housing picks up, everything else kind of kicks in, especially the retail, the dining, the recreation. Eventually, even the downtown schools get better, which was our experience in Washington, D.C. Jane Jacobs, in the best planning book ever, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, written in 1961, I believe, she talked about Wall Street, which back then was a very different place than it is now in New York. And she said, why is there not a single good restaurant, like great restaurant on Wall Street? Why is there not a great gym on Wall Street? And she said, what's missing is time spread. A great restaurant needs lunch customers and dinner customers. A great gym needs daytime customers and evening customers and early morning customers. And you only get that when you have people living there as well as working there. And so cities that want to inject more lives into their downtown, they're actually investing in bringing more housing to their downtown. And depending on the city, they either need more market rate housing, like you do, or actually more affordable housing, like for example, Newton, where I'm also working. The problem is the affordability, not the market rate stuff. But you want a nice mix of market and non-market rate housing. This is Des Moines, where I recently did a downtown transportation plan, and I learned that there are cranes everywhere in Des Moines. Like, why are there so many cranes in Des Moines? Well, there's a lot of business in Des Moines, but the city decided that if you were going to build new housing, market rate housing in Des Moines, they would give you a 10-year tax abatement, no city tax for 10 years as a developer, and beyond that, for the next 10 years, they do tax increment financing as well. So essentially, you weren't paying taxes for a long time. And they've gone from 2,500 housing units in the year 2000 to the pipeline will have 10,000 units built by 2020. And the city actually made the decision, not to put pressure on the mayor, but the city made the decision, we're going to pay for it, essentially, because it was that important to have the time spread in the downtown. The other part of the usefulness argument is transit, because of course, transit is what makes walking useful beyond that 5 or 10 minutes that most people are willing to walk. And here you're blessed in the sense that you have, you're part of a regional transit system that's better than most, although you're probably only aware of its flaws. And you have the train station in the heart of your downtown, which is taking you right to North Station. You have this parking garage, and I wasn't going to mention this, but I learned it in conversation before the talk. You have this parking garage, which is vastly underutilized. When do people park if they're parking and riding to work? During the day. When do people park if they're living in a place? During the night. What we learned in Lowell was that developers, it was actually learned before I got there, I talk about it in my book, developers were unable to build attainable market rate housing because the cost of parking associated with that housing, and the banks wouldn't lend on the housing unless there was parking associated with it. And in Lowell, they identified 5 public garages that were largely empty overnight, and they assigned those garages to loft conversions in downtown Lowell. And that's what got them over the threshold to be able to afford to build attainable housing, attainable market rate housing in downtown Lowell. This is money in the bank right here. You have to do some negotiating with the MBTA, which we're currently doing in Newton, to share the garage. But all these spots that are empty during the day and many more that are empty at night could actually float the development of new housing within walking distance of the train station because the parking could be provided there through a partnership. So that's a possibility. And then I was just commenting on your pretty good train schedule. I understand a lot of people drive south to take the Blue Line, but for people who want to live in downtown Lynn, which is quite convenient to downtown Boston, want to live here and walk to the train and take it downtown, I think that potential is quite great. That's the first category. The second category is the big category. And I'm going to talk about maybe 5 things out of 20 or so that make a street safe or not safe. And we used to talk about crime, but these days we don't even talk about crime anymore. We talk about your likelihood of being killed by a car. And the first person I met tonight said that one thing that distinguishes people in Lynn is that they've all been hit by a car at one point or another. I don't know if that's everyone, but interesting to know. This part of my talk is about that. So the safe walk, all the things I'm going to talk about, all point back to this diagram, which basically tells you that you're 8 times as likely to be killed by a car going 35 than by a car going 25. And that threshold between 35 and 25 is the threshold at which people are driving in our cities. We, and by we I don't mean me, we have misdesigned our urban streets for many, many years based on a misunderstanding by the traffic engineering profession, which has now redeemed itself somewhat. And there's I met some engineers, I'm sure one of the redeemed engineers in the audience. But for years there was this idea, the first urban traffic safety engineers were basically, traffic safety grew up on highway design. So the first urban traffic engineers basically started out as highway engineers. If you're designing highways, what you learn is the way you make a highway safe is to remove all opportunities for conflict. Because how do you determine how fast you go on a highway? You see the speed limit, and if you're like me, you set your cruise control for 9 miles an hour over the speed limit, right? But it's based on the speed limit that's posted. If people are going the speed posted or some, function of that speed, then anything you can do to remove conflict makes it safer. Wider lanes are safer, straighter streets are safer, one-way travel versus two-way is safer, no trees is safer, no parallel parking is safer, no intersections is safer. Those are all things that make highways safer, which the highway engineers then brought to the design of city streets. Misunderstanding that the way that you set your speed in a city is not the same way. Your speed in a city is set by the speed at which you feel safe driving, right? You're not looking so much at speed limits. You feel a certain amount of friction, you feel a certain amount of risk to yourself and others, probably more to yourself than to others, and you set your speed based on that. So what are the factors in urban design that cause people to be driving closer to 25 or closer to 35 miles an hour? And even though it's counterintuitive, some of them you might think would make a street more dangerous, they actually don't, because they get people driving more slowly and more cautiously. So the first one is block size. This is Portland, Oregon, famously walkable, famously 200-foot blocks, some of the smallest blocks in America. This is Salt Lake City, same scale, famously unwalkable, famously 600-foot blocks. And here they are. This is my family crossing the street in Salt Lake City. They actually give you flags to hold up so you won't be plowed down. Because in a 600-foot block city, Portland, most of the streets average 2 lanes. There's a lot of 1-laners and some 4-laners, but the streets kind of average 2 lanes. In a 600-foot block city, the streets average about 5 lanes, 5 or 6 lanes. And so this is the condition. Here they are, side by side, just different animals. And here's a study of 24 different California cities where they found that when you double the average block size and then look at the number of fatal crashes not on highways, basically quadruples. So there's this great inverse relationship between block size and safety. Smaller blocks are better. Here you are in the heart of your downtown, and here's where I have to back up and say, I'm going to be talking mostly about downtown Lynn. There are some other parts of Lynn, and in my book I use the word downtown. I'm always using the word downtown, and I realize that I'm very vague and inconsistent in the way that I use it. But what I mean by downtown is basically places that have mixed uses in close proximity. So it can be your downtown core, it can be a main street somewhere in a more suburban neighborhood, but essentially it's anywhere where walking is possible, which we learned in that first category, the useful walk, means that you have a mix of uses. So that's why I focus so much on downtowns, because actually you can, if you don't have a good mix or a good balance in your downtown, it's pretty easy to fix. No one's going to fight you tremendously if you try to add more residential to a largely commercial area. What we have learned, doesn't need much explanation, is that you will be fought and defeated if you try to add commercial to a residential area, right? Try and put a 7-Eleven in someone's cul-de-sac and you'll see very quickly, right, what happens. So downtown is the place where mixed use is possible, and therefore it's the place where walking can be useful, and therefore walkability is possible. So I am focusing on your downtown. And I'm focusing on your downtown core, because your downtown core is the heart and soul of Lynn, it's the image of Lynn, it's the part of Lynn that people picture when they're thinking about moving or not moving to Lynn, and it's the place where the walkable, sustainable lifestyle is possible. So focusing on your downtown, we see, same scale, that your blocks are quite small. You have this wonderful New England cranky, intersecting grids, cow path generated, I don't know if that's ever true, cow paths in Boston and these other cities were the foundation of the roads, but you can see that it's what I call a medieval network, right? It's not a simple gridiron, but the blocks are nice and small. Here you are side by side with Portland, And you know, the blocks, some of them are longer, but most of them are quite narrow, right? And so this is where we step back and say, your bones are good. And honestly, if you don't have that small block system, it's very hard. It's very hard to create a walkable downtown. So you're starting in a good place. Now you do notice as you go a little bit further southwest, so we're just moving, if this is the downtown, we're just coming this way. And what you see is some places where the blocks have been consolidated, or maybe for some bizarre reason they were originally industrial or something, but this is too big of a block. And I'm guessing, I would bet it used to be more blocks. Here's one that I know used to be more blocks, and at a certain point in the 60s or 70s, this affordable housing was put here, including this little cul-de-sac, right? So this is what you call super blocking. Taking multiple blocks and combining them into one, which was all the rage during the urban renewal of the 60s and 70s. And still it's a threat to our downtowns, because universities often try to get you to consolidate blocks. Hospitals are always trying to get you to consolidate blocks. The main message of this segment, aside from the fact that you're in good shape with your old network, is to remember not to let anyone to mess with it. Don't let anyone do any more super blocking, because the super blocking makes the streets less safe and makes the city less walkable. The next, of course, is the number of lanes. Here, and I commuted up here, I drove up here during rush hour. A, because it was the time I needed to get up here, but B, because I kind of wanted to experience that. And I have to say, I'm someone who doesn't commute to work, and I haven't commuted to work in many years for a variety of reasons. When I commute, it's like tomorrow at 6 a.m. to Logan. But it always just amazes me that all the people who are willing to sit in all that traffic for all that time. And every year it's a few more people and a little bit longer. But I think there's a very important message I want to share with you, which is that, and this is actually the story I tell everywhere I go, and it applies not just to highways, but to city streets. And that is the fact that there's a lot of temptation, and you'll hear people say it, and even still, almost, I think 35 different states in the US currently have highway expansions on the books, and they're justifying all of these highway expansions and roadway expansions with congestion. They're saying the reason we need to expand this highway or add more lanes to this road is because of congestion, either current or anticipated. And when you do that drive, which felt like this to get up here from Boston every day, and you're stuck in a lot of, there's a lot of slow portions in Lynn where people are coming to Lynn, but they're coming through Lynn, right? And it's slow going. It's very tempting to say, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could solve this problem by making the roads bigger, or getting rid of the parallel parking on this street and adding a couple lanes, or doing, who knows what. So the story I have to tell you is the story of induced demand. And what the theory of induced demand says, relates, is this. This is ideal traffic planning. This is the capacity of your street. This is the number of trips on the street. When the number of trips exceeds the capacity, you get congestion. And what traffic engineers used to believe, and some still do, is that when you widen the street, you can absorb the congestion and your congestion will go away. But what happens is this, and it always happens, and this is called induced traffic. These are the trips from here to here. These are the trips that actually weren't happening because of congestion. And the operative phrase here is that, if your city isn't congested, it's not operating. But in cities like this, which at rush hour are often congested, the operating phrase is, in congested systems, the principal constraint to driving is congestion. And once you understand that, all these people who tell you we need to widen highways because they're congested, you realize that they're not telling the truth. Because these are the people who were taking transit because the congestion was so bad, or they were carpooling because the congestion was bad, or they lived close to work because the congestion was bad. And when you remove that congestion, you remove the constraint, and then they stop carpooling. Maybe they commute just, in a lot of cities where I work, it's just Do they commute on peak or off? Like when you make the road wider, people just all commute at the same time again. And when you make the road less wide, the people's commutes spread out, right, over time. So people make these decisions based on the congestion, and for that reason, you can't build your way out of it, right? However many times you try. This was in Newsweek magazine. It says, today's engineers acknowledge that building new roads usually makes traffic worse. And I read this and I jumped for joy, and then I said, landed, and said, wait a minute, who are these engineers? May I please meet some? Because at this point, when this came out, which was literally like 15 years ago, almost no engineers were talking about it. Now, most of them are, and I think in a place like Boston, there's a reason why your roads haven't been widened more, because we have more sophisticated engineers here and they understand that. But my principal message to you is, don't let anyone ever tell you that you can have less congestion in Lynn by having a greater supply of roads in Lynn. The question isn't whether you're going to have traffic or not, it's how many lanes of traffic you want. And the mandate to citizens here, or people who work here, is to make the streets they want and then watch them get congested, because they will. So you have to make the streets you want. So this is the engineer who and this has happened to me on like 3 different projects where they say, we got to make that 2-lane road a 4-lane road because traffic is coming. And you put the road in and the traffic comes and they say, see, I told you it was coming. Here's the study. It was submitted to it was published at the Paris School of Economics. Very straightforward. Actually, I have no idea what this means. But I know what this means, which is all the data shows you that immediately all your new capacity, 40% of it is absorbed immediately, and within 4 years, 100% of it's absorbed immediately. Metro areas, what we learned in looking at metro areas like Boston, which invested less in transportation infrastructure, and then cities like Atlanta and Nashville, which invested more in I should say not infrastructure, but roadways, is what they bought themselves was longer commutes. In Atlanta, they went from a 20-minute commute to a 40-minute commute. And that's what they gained with this investment. And then, I said 4 years, but there's been cases like the 405 widening that just happened in Los Angeles, where the day it opened, it was more congested than the day it closed, and it's never gotten any better, even though they added a lane or 2. So that's my message to you, is things like this, which probably I don't know it was here before, and roundabouts and other things have their own value for safety and for accessibility to pedestrians and other things, but don't do more of these to ease congestion. Only do them to improve other things like walking and biking. The next category under the safe walk is the width of the lanes, right? How many lanes, but then how wide are the lanes? This is the slide Andres Kawani used to show. This nose was like someone was doing donuts. And Andres would show this slide and he'd say, the typical road to the typical subdivision in America is now wide enough to allow you to experience the curvature of the earth. And it's true. The standards have shifted. So here's a subdivision from the 60s, and here's one from the 80s. And look at the width of the road. 60s, same height of airplanes. 60s, 80s. There's been this mission creep, and the roads just got wider. My old neighborhood in South Beach in Miami, when it wasn't draining properly and they had to rebuild the curbs, this new standard kicked in, and we lost half our sidewalk and all our street trees because the standard had gotten wider. Now, what is a wider street? A wider street is a faster street. We know intuitively that a 10-foot lane in urban conditions, a 10-foot lane is an urban lane, is a 30-mile-an-hour lane. A 12-foot lane is a highway lane. It's a 70-mile-an-hour lane. And you know that when you're driving. So when you're on a wider lane, you go faster. Here's the data. Well, just one study, but they all tend to turn out about the same. As the lanes get wider, the vehicle speeds get higher. One study blames excessive lane width on 900 fatalities, 900 fatalities per year. And citizens know this, and you'll get, when they have the opportunity, citizens will fight for narrower lanes. This is in Birmingham, Michigan. And then this is a project that we built, like any, again, it's a new town project. I said I wouldn't talk about that anymore, but here's a picture of a new town, a piece of a new town that we built outside of Charleston called Ion. And And this is not even a 10-foot lane. This is what you find, for example, where I grew up in Belmont, and in many of our historic neighborhoods, and you have them too. It's a local street that's not really connecting anywhere. Then you can have a roughly 12-foot lane that handles traffic in two directions. And this is something that we fight for and have to change the rules almost everywhere we work. But you can do this in more residential areas. The developer of this, Vince Graham, he's a very good speaker, and he goes to conferences and he shows this image, and he quotes this famous philosopher who said, "Broad is the road that leads to destruction, narrow is the road that leads to life." And it's true. It's placed very well in the South, as you might imagine. So when it comes to urban streets, though, the standard is 10 feet. And this is NACDO. We waited 20 years for this. But this is the National Association of City Transportation Officials saying lane widths of 10 feet are appropriate in urban areas. And it's important to have that standard. And so when I work in a city, the first thing I do is I count the lanes. This is a city where I actually left out a whole segment about how we removed lanes in Oklahoma City and in Cedar Rapids and other places, because honestly, you don't have those kind of big fat Midwestern streets with extra lanes and all your lanes are, certain times are congested. I don't see removing lanes as a real opportunity here. I do see it most other places I work. But then I look around and say, okay, where are the lanes too wide? And you have plenty of 10-foot lanes all over this town and some even narrower ones. But you also have places like, this is your lovely common that's really unique in the sense of its great length through the center of your community, an unusual shape, which unfortunately feels a little bit like a highway median because of these big roads that are on either side of it. And having 2 lanes of traffic in one direction and parking on one side, it's not necessarily a bad street. But this should be a 27 to 28 foot street. 10 feet, 10 feet, 7 or 8 feet, right? This is North Common Street, and it's 35 feet. So you have an extra 7 feet that's doing nothing but convincing people to speed. On the south side, North Common, South Common, same thing, 2 lanes of driving and a parking lane, it's 40 feet. So you have 12 to 13 extra feet. What can we do with that extra asphalt? I'll get to that in a minute, but you can see that you have places in your community where a simple restriping, and I always say don't rebuild, restripe. Don't move any curbs around unless you have to, because that's super expensive, whereas paint is very cheap. And the strategy we use in most cities is to lay down a new top coat and then restripe it and not rebuild it. So there's an opportunity there. Here's Neptune Boulevard, where you can achieve speeds that will launch you out of the atmosphere and towards Neptune. And each side of this is, I believe, 1 lane of traffic and parking. So it should be 18 feet. Now, not to get too inside baseball, but if you've got 1 lane of traffic next to parking, you can make the lane 12 feet because it's constrained. But in any case, 20 feet maximum, maybe. And it's 34 feet. On both sides of the street, it's 34 feet. Now, don't come in and say, oh, we can fit 2 lanes here. Don't do that to me, right? But point being, there's extra asphalt that could be put to better use. And if it was reconfigured, it would not encourage speeding. And then you have a more typical street, like State Street, which actually looks fine. But you measure it and say, oh, it's actually 40 feet across, so you have 5 extra feet. And we had this experience as working in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Almost all the downtown streets were 40 feet. And so we made a plan, and they've started it, to put in just a single bike lane on these streets. Now you have to find a partner somewhere else, right? You find another street, you put in a single bike lane in the other direction. But I'm not even against putting in a single bike lane that has no partner, if what it does is visually narrows the street so that people driving on it feel more constrained, and then they'll drive more carefully. So that's that. Parallel parking, often neglected, is an essential barrier of steel that protects the sidewalk from moving vehicles. I'm always fighting to maintain parallel parking. This is Fort Lauderdale, happy hour, and famous for happy hour. This is happy hour in Fort Lauderdale. Himmershey Boulevard, bars on both sides of the road. This is the way out of town. And they had a rule that you couldn't park here, so we could get 2 lanes of traffic out of town. But no one wants to sit on a sidewalk next to cars moving quickly. So this is happy hour on the parked side of the street, and this is happy hour on the unparked side of the street. And this restaurant just kept going out of business. Eventually, due to my study, they brought the parking back, even during rush hour, and now it's much better. And then the other part of this picture is the street trees. You guys do pretty well with parking. You don't do so well with street trees, and that's, unfortunately, it's a much more expensive thing to fix, right? But street trees are, used to be dismissed as FHOs, fixed and hazardous objects, that made it more dangerous to drive. And on highways, that's the case. The studies of cities show that when one street has a segment that has street trees and another segment that doesn't, the segment with street trees is safer because people are driving more slowly. Street trees slow cars down. Oops, sometimes dramatically. There's the picture. But better that he hits a tree than a pedestrian, right? And this is an image from some European artist drew of what a sidewalk feels like when you have neither the parallel parking or the street trees to protect you from the roar of traffic. And the typical condition in Lynn, shared by many older New England communities, is just at one point or another, the sidewalks are narrow, it's hard to have trees in all of them, and eventually it fell out of the standard. What we see here is a pretty new-looking sidewalk that is wide enough to have a narrow tree pit if you grade it so you can walk on it, right? It's wide enough to have a narrow tree pit. So this leads me to suspect you have a current city standard that doesn't require a certain minimum of tree planting when a sidewalk is rebuilt. And I'm here to tell you it's worth the investment in 100 different ways. There's a whole chapter. My book only has like 10 chapters. It has the 10 steps of walkability. Each one is a chapter, and one of them is plant trees. I dedicated a whole chapter to trees because they do so many things in addition to improving safety. They absorb stormwater, they absorb CO2, they reduce urban heat islands, they increase real estate values in ways that accrue back to the city in the form of taxes. So I'm here to argue for more street trees. Don't dig up your healthy sidewalks, but whenever you put in a new sidewalk, if you can fit trees, I would advocate very strongly for that. And then finally, I'm trying to come up with a better word for this, but I'll call it vocabulary. There's the matter of vocabulary. What's the language that's being used in this urban area? So this is what I call honesty in journalism. This is the failing addition to the Strip in Las Vegas. And the Las Vegas Sun says, some say the entrance to city center is not inviting to pedestrians. Really? But the point is that whenever you have aerodynamic shapes, stream-form geometric, swoops, definitely swoops or things that look like things, that basically look like flow, then it communicates it's a place for vehicles and not a place for people. And so vocabulary is very important. Anything that's kind of slippery and slidey gets cars to speed up and makes pedestrians feel less welcome. And you all you're not doing so badly there, but I found this one example, and of course it's a state highway. And unfortunately it's a state highway, which means fixing it is harder, right? But there's this stretch of Broad Street, aptly named, and they painted it green like that was going to solve the problem, right? But you have this swoopy thing moving through that creates a left-hand turn lane and then a pork chop over here, that's the technical term, a slip lane over here. And this is the sort of vocabulary that tells cars that this is a car place and not a people place. But here, and by the way, what a beautiful, urban environment. If it wasn't for this street, this would be a perfectly walkable scene, right? For reasons I'm going to talk about next as I get into my last categories. But look at this. This is 3 lanes, a turn lane, 2 driving lanes, plus 2 parking lanes. So it should be 48 feet maximum. It's 75 feet. Now about 10 of that, maybe 8 feet of that is this median. If you were to pull this median out, we have to work with MassDOT here. If you were to pull this median out, which isn't doing anything good for you, you could reconfigure this street to hold a lot more other things, perhaps angled parking, perhaps bicycling, which we're going to talk about. But this is a real opportunity right there. And then finally, this is a new technology that I just discovered, but there's the issue of the fork. And you have all these forks in your downtown. You have crossing forks. I guess you can call this a bow tie, right? And you have more than one of these in your downtown. And we learned from what Jeanette Sadiq-Khan did in New York City, in a bunch of places, including Times Square. And what you see here is what used to be a street. Do you see that? And the technique, and I've just written an article for City Lab that isn't out yet, called How to Fix a Fork. And it's amazing what you can do, because in a typical fork, this pavement and this pavement is redundant. Because if this guy has the green light, this guy doesn't. So this pavement's never being used while this pavement's being used, and vice versa. They have to take turns. And because they have to take turns, one of these is actually redundant and unnecessary. And you can fix it like this, right? So the car that's coming in, instead of doing that, just does that. And that's what they did in New York City, where the cross streets come in and turn instead of angling down. And it created all this public space. So I asked myself, what would that mean for this fork in the heart of your downtown? Here's what it looks like, right? And it would look like this. Can you see this? You could actually claim, half the fork in both of these places and create public spaces. Actually, after I looked at this, I realized this one should be over here, for reasons I don't want to get into, dealing with the direction of traffic. But the point is that half of this pair can be shut down, and half of this pair can be shut down, creating a nice big public space that is worth the investment if it's done in conjunction with a general improvement of this area. And I think this is a very special area in your downtown, but it struck me as one real opportunity to use a new technology to make this place better. And if you want to see a good example of them, one was just done at a place called Lafayette Square, but it's in Central Square in Cambridge. They did one of these, and it's quite successful. So there's that. Now, if you talk to any planners and you want to know what's new in planning, what's been going on in the last decade or 20 years, I like to say that bicycling is the greatest revolution currently underway in only some American cities, right? And many global cities. I mean, in Copenhagen, I think, in Copenhagen, 6 times as many people bike or walk to work or school than drive. That's how far you can go. In the US, some cities have a lot of cycling, and some cities don't have a lot of cycling. And climate is a factor, but it's not a huge factor. Topography, hilliness is a factor, but it's not a huge factor. What's the biggest factor? Investment in cycling infrastructure, period. This is Portland, Oregon, where they invested $65 million in biking infrastructure over about 25 years. I asked my friend Tom Brennan for some pictures of the bike commute in Portland, and he sent me these pictures. I said, "What is this bike to work day?" He's like, "No, this is Tuesday in Portland." Because they spent that money and they created, a good network. And it's hard in New England streets to do it because a lot of them are cranky and narrow, but it's possible. This is Chicago, where Rahm Emanuel put in these really nice bike lanes, and this is the gold standard. You may have seen some of these in Boston. This is called the protected bike lane. The parallel parking has been peeled off the curb and is now a barrier that protects the bikes, and there's a door zone buffer, protects the bicycles from the moving traffic. This is a two-way lane. This guy's in the wrong side, I don't know why. Then they came back and they painted it green and made it permanent, still going the wrong way. But you get the point. And when this was done in New York City to Prospect Park West, and a 3-lane road was turned into a 2-lane road with a protected bike lane, of course, the number of cyclists tripled, speeding went from 75% of all drivers to 17%, injury crashes dropped 63%, but remarkably, the road handles just as many cars as it did before, as quickly as before. Because what happened was, in the prior condition, people were just speeding from red to red, and now they're driving much more safely. So, this being New York, there was a massive lawsuit that lasted 5 years. Eventually, the bike-hating NIMBY trolls grudgingly surrendered to reality. But I like to show this picture and compare it to this picture. Where do you want your daughter biking? And the protected lane is just such a vast improvement over being in the door zone. Now there are certain streets where this is the right solution, but it's not as ideal as the protected lane. Because when you have this lane, people can open their doors, the delivery trucks are, there's always something in the lane, right? In my neighborhood, the FedEx trucks or the UPS trucks, so there's reasons to protect it. And then there's the whole, I talked to a gentleman tonight who's working on complete streets for Lynn. And complete streets is a great thing, but it needs to be the right complete streets. So there are places where it doesn't make sense to have a bike lane. And if you're going to have it, then for God's sake, protect it, because this is just a death trap, whether you have a stroller or a bicycle. And then finally, there's this concept, you guys know about the sharrow, right? You've probably seen these sharrows around. And if you're a cyclist, most cyclists don't really like them. But then they finally did the study and found out that streets with sharrows are less safe than streets that have nothing at all. And this got into the news, and I went on Twitter and I asked my followers, we need a new sharrow symbol that represents what the sharrow really accomplished, and oops, there's this. This was first, but yeah, the winner was the prero. I pray that no one hits me. So I don't advocate for sharrows. So anyway, urban cycling, it's not a cult, as some would have you believe. Business leaders want it to attract talent. They understand that young talent wants to bicycle. For many years, this was what people imagine. When you say cycling, people picture this guy, the mammal, the middle-aged man in Lycra, right? But this is not your model. This is your audience. And actually, if you look at the statistics, as much as this is your audience, this is your audience. In fact, more so. The lowest quartile of income earners comprise 40% of the cyclists in most American cities. So actually, if you're interested in equity, if you're interested in having a transportation system that's somewhat equitable, then you'll be investing in safer cycling facilities. Okay, that was the big kahuna. There are two categories left, but they're both very quick, so I won't be much longer. The comfortable walk and the interesting walk. The comfortable walk has to do with the fact that actually we do like spaces that contain us. And this is a little bit counterintuitive because we all like, climbing mountains and getting beautiful broad views. But actually the evolutionary biologists tell us that all animals, humans among them, were simultaneously seeking prospect and refuge. We want to be able to see our predators coming, but we also want to feel that our flanks are covered from attack. And if we don't feel in our bones that our flanks are covered from attack, we're actually not comfortable in a space. And that's why our favorite spaces have great edges, great street walls. A plaza is only as good as its walls. And that's why, when you can have both prospect and refuge, it's a pretty ideal circumstance. So we've been talking as we urban planners have been talking for many years, what's the best ratio? 3-to-1 is great, 1-to-1 is the Renaissance ideal. Beyond 6-to-1, or somewhere around there, you stop losing your sense of enclosure. You don't feel enclosed anymore. Trees will help, right? So the point is, you don't want to have buildings that are too low, or you don't want to be missing buildings. So this is Salzburg, which is 6-to-1. Further north in Boston, no one's doing shadow studies in Salzburg. It's beautifully comfortable in these streets. And then I always say the opposite of Salzburg is Houston. This is an old picture of Houston. Houston's looking much, much better now. But the main point of this slide is that in most of our cities, it is the surface parking lot, which is the principal villain in this conversation about what we call spatial definition. We want our streets to feel like outdoor living rooms, which means they have good walls, and the parking lot often gets in the way. So your best streets are those that have this wonderful ratio. It's even better, thanks to your medieval street network, you get buildings at the end, right? This is really a lovely outdoor living room. So is that, right? With the object even that helps define the space. And then there's lots of other places in your downtown where one side or both sides of the street is missing, particularly if it's a supermarket or that sort of thing. And of course, that's the way that we built supermarkets during that era. Generally, you have parts of your city, and I don't have time to really get into this in great detail, but you have parts of your city that even your downtown, they're going to be principally automotive, and mostly for cars, and you're going to have parts of your downtown which need to connect to each other that are going to be your pedestrian network. And for buildings that are built in your pedestrian network, they need always to pull up to the sidewalk. You have to put the parking behind, you can't put it in front. And I imagine that's a rule you already have, I hope it is. And you can see, and this is why I get excited about the potential for excess parking here. There's a lot of missing teeth in your downtown, and what you see is a pretty intact core through here, and then a lot of missing teeth that are needed for the spatial definition of the streets around them that are available, some more than others I'm sure, but are available for new development. And then looking at this again, I suggested that the road should only be improved if there's opportunity for making the complete package. And that would mean not just this, but that, right? And all I've done is take the front 60 feet of anything that's lining the street. You don't need the whole parking lot, you just need 60 feet for a residential building, right? But the filling the missing teeth then is what turns these spaces into not just calmer streets, but outdoor living rooms that you would want to inhabit. Then finally, the interesting walk. We humans are among the social primates. Nothing interests us more than other humans. We need signs of human activity if we're going to be interested enough to keep walking. And if we're not interested, we're so easily bored that we'll just turn around and find a car to drive. So, we talked about one-to-one being the Renaissance ideal. This is one-to-one. It's in Grand Rapids, which is a very walkable downtown, but no one wants to walk on this street because, on one side of your street is an exposed parking deck, and the other side is a hotel conference facility that was apparently designed in admiration for that parking deck. Here's where I say blame the architects. But we learned in Charleston, right? Mayor Riley in Charleston, who was mayor for 40 years, and founded the Mayor's Institute on City Design. He taught us, it only takes 20 feet of building to hide 200 feet of parking. Right? There's actually two solutions. There's a building which can be retail or it can be residential. Just any sort of inhabited edge that's between you and the parking lot. Or the alternative, this is the same parking lot now, going further down the street. The building cuts back and then there's retail in the base, which happens to be a restaurant which has sidewalk dining. And I took this picture, Google took this picture not during lunch because when I was here, it was very busy. So those are the two models, and then here's the version in Miami I like a lot. I call this the Chia Pet Garage, right? But the enlivened ground floor, the parking is set back a little bit. You have one major parking garage in your downtown, it's the one associated with the train. And so the person who did this was on the ball, said, let's put retail down here. But I don't know if anything's changed since this picture. But what a lot of cities have done is they put retail in places where retail just isn't going to succeed. And that's why the other model, where you actually have a liner that's residential, is a more trustworthy model. If it's not part of a continuous retail strip, it's hard to get retail to succeed. And so I'd actually point you more towards the other model in terms of any subsequent garages you might be building, depending, of course, on where they are. And then finally, this is a segment I have in all my shows, but here it's quite relevant. Because you've been working on this for some time. I was at the National Endowment for the Arts for 4 years, and I oversaw the design division, and we gave out a lot of grants, and the NEA gave out a lot of grants for public art. And for so many years, public art was like plop art, right? It was the Calder sculpture or something less understandable that lands on the plaza in front of the building. People can or can't relate to it. But there's been a real revolution in public art because a lot of folks have understood that it has a remedial function, right? Its job is to remedy places that are otherwise lacking. In this case, the blank wall that is boring between two places that aren't so boring. And so I'm always telling cities to direct their public art budgets towards those places that are blank and boring so that the walk is still interesting. So this is the American version. Here's the European version. But take care of it, keep it clean. Whoops. Sorry. Now, so then I went on Google and I said, can I find any murals in Lynn, and of course you have this awesome program where a lot of murals are going up, and so I don't need to tell you this, but I wholeheartedly support that effort and want you to understand it's not just about making places more artful, it's about providing that interesting walk that's going to keep people out of their cars or wishing they had cars. And then I saw this, which by the way looks a lot better in person than in Google. But I've been told it's not an artwork. And it's ready for a mural. But my point is there's still a lot of blank walls that you can work on. And this is a very important one. And that's everything. So the kind of sad conclusion though is you have to do it all. You know, if the walk is not simultaneously useful, safe, comfortable, and interesting, it's a walk that people won't take by choice. And therefore you need to start small with something as perfect as you can make it, and I would say in the heart of your downtown core, and work outward from there. And you know, you already have a lot of momentum and a lot of great bones to work from. So that is a happy conclusion. I want to share just some resources with you. I'll be signing books over there. I hope you read it. These are the other books for the junkies, and they're selling, they're selling Suburban Nation over there. Suburban Nation is the book that tells the whole sprawl versus town story, so if you found that particularly compelling, I'd recommend that. And then another book you can get is called The Smart Growth Manual, which is a lot of this stuff, but it was designed to be read by a mayor or a real estate developer in a single cross-country flight. So it's very quick and simple with pictures. And then finally, you guys are missing by 1 month my next book coming out. So I can't sign them and give them to you. But the Walkable City, you'll see if you read it, was designed to convert people to wanting to make these changes in their communities, but it has no pictures, it has no diagrams, it has very little technical stuff. This is the book that has all the pictures and the technical and everything else. It's coming out next month, Walkable City Rules. I hope some of you will read it. And then the TED Talks I mentioned. This one called, if you go to TED and look up my name, which is S-P-E-C-K, this one, The Walkable City, is all about why. I didn't talk about it at all today. It's about the health reasons, the environmental reasons, the economic reasons why we need to make our cities more walkable. And then if you want to show someone a 15-minute version of the talk I just gave, there's this one called 4 Ways to Make a City More Walkable. But that's the very short version of what I just shared with you. So what you're going to do tomorrow is round up all your folks at work and get a television. And at lunch, you can all watch this together. And then finally, I teach a class at Harvard every summer, and it's 2 days of this. You know how I said this is an 8-hour lecture? The first day is 8 hours of this lecture. The second day is a workshop and a studio exercise. And with George Proakis, who's the awesome city planner in Somerville, we go and visit some sites in Somerville, and then we actually do a design exercise. People take this course from all over the world. They fly in from Brazil or God knows where. It is expensive because it's Harvard. But when you're done with these 2 days, you get a piece of paper that really makes it look like you graduated from Harvard. So I think it's a really good investment. So we haven't set the date yet for 2019, but if you get in touch with me via my website, I can connect you with that. And relatively speaking, you don't have to travel to get there, so it might be a good deal for you. My website is jeffspeck.com, and all these resources, videos, everything else, anything else you might want to access is available there. So now I think I've left you with everything I can. I look forward to talking to you at the book table, but thank you so much for your kind attention. It's really been a pleasure talking to you.